Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Cadence Podcast. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. My name's Matt Sykes, I'm your host. If you're a regular listener, thank you very much for coming back and being part of the Sales Cadence Podcast community. A couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a client of mine who's an independent financial advisor. I'd met his boss. I was doing a talk at an event. He came down and spoke to me afterwards and said, be really interested to know if you'd be kind enough to spend some time with one of my team. He's a relatively experienced IFA, but I think he could be even better with spend a bit of time in your company. Maybe you could help him with some training, some coaching. One thing led to another. We had a meeting together in their offices. I sat down with the guy that runs the company and his IFA, and we worked out, where were the challenges, where were the problems, what did they want to achieve as a consequence of working with me, the usual things that you would expect to happen on a kind of a discovery call. We agreed that we could achieve those things together if he put the work in, and we sort of scoped out a plan of action. I didn't send a proposal after that meeting for a reason I'll come on to in a second. But what I did say to them was, look, before we do any kind of training or any kind of coaching, why don't you come along to one of my open sessions? So periodically I run a leads to sales boot camp. It's a half-day session, and it effectively is for anybody in business that is receiving either inbound leads or leads that they've generated through some kind of outbound strategy. They've got a lead in their hand that their marketing and business development activity has created for them, and they want to avoid burning that lead. They want to turn that lead and the money that they've invested in their marketing to create it, they want to turn that lead into cash. And so that Leads to Sales Bootcamp does exactly that. It teaches a number of steps of how you take a lead to a sale. And actually it came about because I spent just over a couple of years back in corporate employment during COVID when I was a head of sales for an organization. And all I really did all day long was have 30-minute Teams calls with prospects. So I was taking leads to sales pretty much 5-6 times a day, every day of the week. So, well over 1,200 calls. And what it allowed me to do is to put into practice a framework that mitigate the risks of a deal not progressing forward and improving the chances of turning that opportunity ultimately into a sale into cash. And over that 2-year period, I refined it so much that actually now when I've left and gone back into my world of sales training, so if you're new to the show, I run a sales training and coaching company called Sales Cadence. My fundamental principles in life is to help anybody in sales stop doing the easy things that make selling difficult and start doing the slightly more challenging things that make selling easy. And Leads to Sales really then is one of my core products that I offer to the marketplace. But I run it periodically as an open program. And what I suggested to the IFA was that he sat my next open session, which was coming around. I think I ran it a month after we met. He came through the workshop and got loads of value out of it. He kept in contact with me. I always say to all of my clients, whether they're just coming through for a half-day workshop or they're on a 6-month training program like many of my corporate clients are. Obviously, if you're a Sales Cadence client, you're a client for life. And you can ring me up, email me anytime you want, and I'll answer whatever question I can, give you a second opinion on something. That's all part of the service. So we're 3 months after him going through the boot camp, and the phone rang a couple of weeks ago. And he said, Matt, putting a training into practice, I had some challenge with some of it, but some of it's working brilliantly for me. And I've had a really good first quarter. So I'm really grateful for the help and advice that you've given me. However, I'm starting to see that deals in quarter 2 are stalling. And he basically said that he'd got 11 proposals out with clients, and he's not entirely sure what's going to happen to those 11 proposals. He just didn't quite have his finger on the pulse of knowing what was going to happen next with each of them. And he said, so have you got any advice on how I can improve that situation? I don't know, avoid it from happening in the future, because it's really frustrating when I'm just sort of waiting for things to happen. And boy, oh boy, is he right. That is so frustrating. And having been there in the past, previously when I was in sales, it's ever so easy for us to fall into that trap of sending out a quotational proposal and then just waiting to see what happens next. And so what it did was it reminded me of an episode that I did back in April 2019, which was, are you making these mistakes when sending a quotational proposal? Within that episode, it's well worth listening to it. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to that one after this one, if you like, because what it will do is it will bring 2, I hope, really good episodes together. Because episode 17, April 19, are practical tips of what to effectively put into a proposal. So if I give you an example, it kind of is really important when you're sending a proposal to put in a range of options. So you might know what the solution is that you're bringing to this prospect's attention, but if you can put two other options around it, so option 1, 2, or 3, that does a number of things. And so never send a proposal until you've got a number of options in there, because the things that it does is, number one, it gives them the choice. They can choose either bronze, silver, or gold. I would always, when I send mine, always include options, but I would always point them in the direction of the one that I believe to be the best one for them. But the second thing it does is it absolutely reeks of you investing time in them. What you're basically saying by putting options in is, I've thought long and hard about this, and there is more than one way of skinning a cat. And I actually think that you've got two other alternatives as well. You decide which ones fit best for you. I think it's this one, but ultimately it's up to you to decide. Episode 17, back in April 2019. Are you making these mistakes when sending a proposal or quotation? Go and give that a listen. But what this episode is about is for me to share with you the advice I shared with the IFA. How does he get his proposals moving again? Because that's effectively what happened. And so I think I came up with 6 or 7 pieces of information I think might be helpful as well for anybody who's out there sending clients proposals. If you're going through a typical sales BD role like I was doing previously, which is having conversations with people that are effectively interested to know what you do and how you can help them. And ultimately, at the end of that meeting, they're going to say, this sounds great. Can you send me a proposal? Piece of advice number 1 would be this one. If you're not getting a response to a proposal that they've asked you to send, I want you to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself this question. Was it ever a proposal in the first place? Was it ever meant to be a proposal? I mean, great meeting. They were answering all the right questions. They were nodding all the right places. But just because the meeting went really, really well, does that necessarily mean that they're going to buy from me? And does that necessarily mean I need to go to the next step, which is to spend time pulling all of the information together for them? Could well be they were just fishing for information, just looking for some market intelligence that they couldn't find themselves. So piece of advice I'd always ask first of all is, was it ever a proposal in the first place? A great analogy I'd sometimes use with some of my clients is, and I've done many, many trade shows in my time as an exhibitor. And what I found is that most visitors to trade shows have got trade showitis. They develop this disease, which is they're in a really high state of emotional intensity. It's great to be out of the office. Fantastic to be looking around these wonderful exhibitors, all these brilliant pieces of technology and wonderful stands on show. Lots of smiley people with mints giving me free Hessian bags full of all sorts of leaflets and pens. And they'll listen to you talk about your product or service. They'll smile and nod at all the right places. They'll show you their badge on their lanyard. They'll let you zap that. And yes, please, I need a follow-up call. Oh, I know somebody in the business would love to hear about this. In fact, you should go and talk to somebody I know who works over there. And all this stuff makes everybody feel fantastic, but it's completely unrealistic. And that sometimes can happen in a sales meeting. Sometimes we're guilty in sales of hearing what we want to hear rather than listening for the truth. And the way that you get around that is you take everybody that you're having a conversation with through some kind of framework of discussion. So a bit like I did on Leads to Sales with my IFA and the other delegates on that course. And one of the modules of a sort of 5-module training program that I put in the marketplace, one of those modules is exactly that. What is that process, that step-by-step framework that allows you to have a confident conversation with somebody and allow yourself to know that actually, yes, I do need to send a piece of paper. Piece of advice number 2 I gave him was this. Have you eliminated all of the other possible outcomes? Let's assume that a possible outcome of sending a proposal is they go, fabulous, this is just what we want. When can we start? Now, it's lovely when you hear those words and we all strive for that outcome. Of course we do. But let's be realistic. That sometimes doesn't always happen. And so there must be some other outcomes at play. And so one of the other outcomes will be nothing happens. And it's highly likely that all they are doing is just fishing for information. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But it could well be that nothing happens to your proposal afterwards, simply because they're just looking for information and other priorities come into the business that take their attention. And before they know it, they've completely forgotten about the fact they needed your help. So another outcome would be nothing at all. A really important outcome to think about, especially if you are selling a service to somebody who already buys this and they're looking to switch, is what do you think the incumbent supplier would do? Do you think that incumbent supplier is going to sit there and just take it? I know I certainly wouldn't. I'd want to fight for my business. And most buyers will manufacture that conversation anyway because they'll want to tell the incumbent supplier, look, you're not doing what we expect you to do, or your service hasn't been great, or you're slightly more expensive. So we decide to go and find out what else is in the marketplace. We've come across this other IFA. They're going to orchestrate that conversation. And so don't be surprised if the incumbent decides to do some kind of reaction, some kind of concession to keep the business. And that could be a reason why you don't hear anything more, because the client has decided to stay with their current supplier. There's a possible outcome. Another highly probable outcome, if we go back to this kind of looking for information, fishing for information thing, and there's a high likelihood that they're not just talking to you. They'll be talking to others. And so your proposal could be one of 3 that they're evaluating. And it could well be that they decided that one of the other 2 was a better fit. And that could be the reason why you've not heard back from them. So point number 2 is, have you eliminated all the other possible outcomes? And point number 3 really plays off point number 2, because if there are other possible outcomes, and because in the past you've sent proposals and they've gone nowhere, then point number 3 is this: because this is not your first rodeo, this is not the first proposal you ever sent, you've sent them in the past, you're guilty of sending ones that go nowhere. The logical thing to do is to ask the person who's asked for your proposal, is this going to go somewhere? You might want to bring to their attention some of those possible outcomes and say to them, look, I can take no, it's no problem, but I don't want to waste your time or my time if you are going to do nothing with it. I'd be really interested to know if you are going to talk to your current supplier. You mentioned you've got one. What do you think they'll say when you decide to move your business? I would have that conversation, folks. I teach my clients to ask those questions. Why? Because they're the logical questions to ask. When we're talking about asking questions as well, let's think of the next point number 4. The advice I gave on point number 4 to my IFA was, when you are comfortable, and let's say, for example, you do have a framework for creating a confident conversation with someone that allows you to know that of the possible outcomes, you're in with a chance of winning their business, you want to start to ask a bit more in-depth questions about what's going to go on with the proposal. And the sorts of questions I would ask are as follows. Forgive me for saying this, I would want to go right back to basics, and I would want to ask them what do they want the proposal for. Just be really comfortable with the fact that you want to hear them tell you why they want it. Now you might say, well, hang on a sec, doesn't make sense, Matt, because we've been through this sales call, we've asked all the right questions, we've got a number of steps, we feel really confident, they've told us what their problem was, we know we can solve it, we should know by now why they want it. And I do agree with you, but I want them to tell me. I can gain a lot from listening to them tell me the answer to the obvious question, which is, so why do you want it then? You'll be surprised what people will tell you if you ask them that question. Most buyers don't get asked that why do you want a proposal question. It's not the sort of thing that salespeople would risk doing for fear of upsetting people. My advice to you is push through that and ask them. It's a very respectful question. Just help me understand once more, why do you want the proposal? And let them tell you. The next thing I'd want to ask is, what's going to happen to the proposal that I send you? What do you do with it next? Where does it go? What does its journey look like? Which again is a very logical question to ask, because something's going to happen to it. Or is it going to sit on their desk for 4 weeks or stick in their inbox and never get opened? What happens to it? Teach me, if you wouldn't mind, what is your process for going to the market to getting proposals? What happens to those next? And what you want as feedback or answer to that question is a very logical response. So the first thing that happens, Matt, is obviously I will check it through. If there's something that I'm not happy with, hope you don't mind, I'm going to get in touch with you and have a conversation. But once I've satisfied myself with the contents that's in it and I'm happy with it, then I'm going to forward it onto our purchasing team. We have a purchasing policy, and there are a number of things that need to happen for that proposal to land correctly and for them to be okay with it and sign off on it. When they're happy with it, the successful proposals, so notice I'm now hearing proposals, not mine, there's others as well. The successful proposals then go to the board. It's put on the agenda, and the board meeting then decide which of the 3 will they pick. Now, all of that sounds really, really risky to me, but all of that I love, because now I've got some really good insights and I can start to ask a few more questions and mitigate some of the risks that I just heard. But the net result is I now know with confidence what's going to happen to my piece of paper when I send it in. Another great question to ask is, what are they expecting to see in it? Are we the sort of organisation that just sends the cut and paste? Or are we the sort of organisation that really gives a shit and wants to put into the proposal what they want to read? Because here's the risk of not asking that question. They might miss out on seeing that thing that they want to see in it. That one thing that might clinch it for you, you didn't even know needed to go in because you didn't ask the question, what are you expecting to put in it? So I would literally go down a bit of a checkbox exercise. So there's a bunch of things we normally put in a proposal. It'll be this, and this. How many of those things do you want to see in it? And what have I missed? I want to ask another question, which is, who else gets to see it? I've already found out there's a purchasing committee. I found out there's a board. So I kind of answered that question. But what I'd also like to know about, other than the fact of who else gets to see it, is I want to know if there's something that they might want to see in it as well. There's a various number of different buyers. If you've ever experienced anything like Miller Hyman, then you'll know that there's a technical buyer, there's a user buyer, there's a financial buyer, and each of those people will be key to making a decision. And each of those people will probably have slightly different things that they would want to see in a proposal before they're willing to sign off on it. Tip number 5. Oh man, this is so important. And again, the great thing about having the phone call from my IFI client was he actually said to me, Matt, I think I know the answer, but I'm just ringing you up to just check. I think where I went wrong was step number 4 and that module that you teach, which is resource. And he's absolutely right. So step 4 in the Leads to Sales program is resource. And resource is all about making sure that your prospect or buyer has the commitment to be able to buy from you. So I really love it when clients teach me back what I've taught them. That tells me that learning has taken place. It's brilliant. But here's the key thing. In step 4, one of the things that we need to secure is a feedback call. Because it's insanity, would you not agree, if someone's asked you to send something and you've gone to all of this effort now to make sure that everything that they want to see it is in it and that you know what's going to happen to it when you send it, it kind of is insanity if you don't then have some kind of feedback to say, well, how did that go then? You've created these actions, and now what you want to know is, did the actions work? And so anybody that sends a proposal that works with me and hasn't secured a feedback call before they send it, immediate red flag. He wouldn't be phoning me up if he hadn't have dropped the ball on step 4, which he now knows, and I'm so delighted he pointed it out to me before he asked for my opinion, because he'd already solved his own problem. So yeah, he has dropped the ball. He's got a number of proposals out there where for whatever reason he didn't secure a feedback call first, but at least he knows that. At least he's learnt that on the program. And so folks, make sure when someone says, send me a proposal, you go, yep, happy to do that. I just want a couple of things as a consequence from you, if you don't mind. Number 1, I need us to put a date in the diary so that after you've had time to digest it, share it around the purchasing team, get their feedback, that you're willing to give me that advice back. I'd like to find out if my proposal landed, if it hit the objectives that you set for me when you asked me to send it. So that's the first thing. Number 2 is a bit of a bonus. If you've got a relationship that's strong enough, the second thing that you'd also ask for, so commitment number 2 from you would be, and the opportunity to put right anything that some of the other team or yourself may have found that you weren't quite happy with. Now, that is not me sending code word to them saying, I'll drop my price if you ask me to. What that's me sending to them is, not only are you going to tell me there's something wrong, you're going to allow me to fix it for you. And that is as close as you can get to winning the business. Tip number 6 comes down to surprises. And the surprise that may have stopped a proposal from moving forward is maybe your price surprised them. Again, if you go back to episode 17, it was one of the tips that I gave in that podcast. I'm chuffed that 5 years later, it's still a spot on tip. You know, if somebody is reading a proposal where the price is a surprise, what I mean by that is it's the first time they've seen it. Don't be surprised if they are surprised by that price, i.e. it's too high, and they decide not to have a conversation with you about it. Price cannot be a surprise. Price needs to be raised in the sales meeting or sales meetings prior to agreeing to send the proposal. Why? Because you need to gauge a reaction. to what their thoughts are around the amount of investment they're going to have to make. You'd want to tackle that in the room. So tip number 6, if your price has surprised people, it could well be the reason why that proposal is now stalled or stuck. They decided it's too expensive, or they've done the 3 quotes thing and decided that because there was one that was slightly cheaper, they've gone with them. Eliminate that, mitigate that risk, talk about money face to face with people, get their assurances that the fee that you're going to put in the proposal is a fee that they believe is acceptable. Advice number 7, and this is such an easy one really when you think about it, but sometimes we're snowblind. We're all so busy, aren't we? We're in whatever it is that you do for a living, there's loads on your to-do list, I'm sure, which is coming at us from all sides, right? It's just getting busier and busier. And the piece of advice I said to my IFA friend was, well, look, if they haven't come back to you, is it just because they're busy on other things? And he didn't have an answer for that. And how could he? And to some extent, it was a rhetorical question because I've no idea, and probably he's no idea either. But what I do know for a fact is this. I don't know of anybody that I speak to who's interested in buying sales training or getting sales coaching for their team who has me as the top of their to-do list. Even though most of the time people engage with me, it's because things are going wrong and they need me to help them fix it, I still don't believe I'm sitting in the top 3 or even 5 things on their priority list. I think I'm somewhere near the top or certainly above the middle, but I know I'm not at the top. And yet if you put the shoe on the other foot, proposal that I've sent to a client where I'm looking to win their business, that's going to be in the top 2 or 3 together with 2 others. So what's at the top of my list won't be at the top of theirs. And sometimes we can take a no reaction as, oh, they obviously don't want to buy, or they're ghosting me, and it could well be the case. But let's not rule out the fact they are going to get to you. They've just got other things that are far more important in their life right now. And that's really why point number 5 is so important. If you eliminate all of this second guessing, are they busy, aren't they? Am I a priority? Aren't I? You eliminate all of that if you've got a feedback call date in the diary. Cut yourself some slack. Yes, there could be some issues, but chances are at some point they're going to get back to you. And just be mindful of the fact that what you don't want to be doing is badgering people. Be respectfully expectant. It's what I teach my clients. Expect a response. You always want to get your ball back. But don't be badgering people and pestering people because then you start to become inconvenient to their world. Last point then really was off the back of 7. They could be busy and they probably are. And so the only way you eliminate that doubt of whether they are or they aren't is you go and ask them. That weird thing called the phone that you don't use to make calls, can you start using it to make calls, please? Go and ring each of them and ask them. Truth be told, most people won't pick the phone up. I don't know if you've noticed that these days, but most people won't pick up a private number that flashes up on their phone. And so be prepared for it to go to voicemail. And so you need to have some kind of voicemail message set up to increase the chances of them replying to you. Now, here's what they're not going to do. They're not going to ring you back. Why? Because no one ever rings a salesperson back, ever. So you're not going to ask them in your message, it's Matt here at XYZ, please can you ring me back on the following number? So you're almost going to tell them that you don't want them to ring them back. Sounds a little bit weird, but it's what most of us in the industry call a pattern interrupt. Hi, it's Matt here from IFA Inc. I'm not looking for a call back, so no need to ring me. But what I would like you to do is to reply to an email that I've just put in your inbox. You'll see the title. It says My Voicemail. If you could open up that and give me a reply, I'd be very grateful. In partnership with that, obviously, I need to send that email with the title, Your Voicemail or My Voicemail. And then within that, it's going to be an email asking them to give me the feedback. In parallel with that email, I'll send them 2 dates for a meeting. I'll send one for a date a week out, and then the second one I'll send probably 3 weeks out. Why? Because I know that the one that's a week out will probably be clash with something else in their diary. And I've got a better chance with the 3-week one. But by giving them 2 options, back to the options thing we talked about earlier, I'm giving them the choice. And the email will say something along the lines of, just sent you a couple of dates for a meeting. Please decline one that doesn't work for you and accept the other. If they decline both, it's giving me a good insight into knowing what is going on in their mind. On most occasions, they accept the 3-week one and they reply to me on email with some kind of apology. I've been busy, lots going on in our business. Proposal was interesting, got a couple of things I'd like to run past you. Music to my ears. That's all I'm looking for. The objective of the conversation with my IFI client was, how do I reheat and get these proposals moving again? Well, you just did it. I mentioned that leads to sales workshop that I teach, but we have mentioned step 4 a couple of times. Step 4 is part of the sales training program that I deliver to my clients. And step 4 is embedded in a sales audit which sits on my website. And so if proposals, and this episode has been interesting to you, if you want to find out where you rank in terms of, whether you are on top of it or you aren't, go onto the website, salescadence.co.uk, and go and take the sales audit. And embedded within that is a range of questions about proposals. There'll be other stuff as well, going right the way through the training program that I deliver. And so it'd be quite useful then for you to sort of ask yourself those questions, go through those statements, and start to self-diagnose, if you like, whether you do or you don't need any further help. And if you do, we can get in touch and we can see where we go with that. Salescadence.co.uk, take the sales audit and start to benchmark how this whole proposal thing is working out for you. Let's summarize on those 8 pieces of advice that I shared with my wonderful IFI client who went through my Lisa Sales Bootcamp. Number 1, be brutally honest with yourself. If a proposal is going nowhere and you haven't got any feedback and you've no idea what's supposed to be happening next, and it's been a number of weeks since you sent it, especially if they were super hyper energetic, enthusiastic during the meeting and they were nodding in all the right places, and you thought to yourself, well, this is a slam dunk, and now you can't understand why it's not. Point number 1 is ask yourself the question, be honest, was it ever a proposal in the first place? Or has this person, without you realizing it, got trade show-itis? Number 2 was eliminate the other possible outcomes. One of the outcomes is they're going to buy from you, but on occasions that doesn't always happen. Have you noticed that? And so therefore, because you know that there are other outcomes, you need to eliminate those outcomes as well before you send it, or at least have confidence to know that you've mitigated as much of the risk of those outcomes happening. Which leads us on to point number 3, which is, because you know that there are a number of outcomes that aren't necessarily going to work out for you, you're a grown-up. There's no reason why you can't be logical and just ask them, is one of these other outcomes likely to happen? I know that sounds strange, but trust me when I tell you, and I use it all the time, it is so effective. You get an honest answer. And actually people's trust in you goes up when they realize they're not in front of some kind of salesperson who's trying to steer the conversation towards a yes. You'll be amazed at what that does for their level of trust and honesty. And you'll get some really good answers to that question, by the way. Number 4, if you're happy to accept that a proposal is worth sending now, there are some things that you should also ask for. Number 1, why do they want it? Number 2, what happens to it when you send it? Number 3, what are they expecting to see in it? Number 4, who else is going to see it? Number 5, what do you think they want to see in it? But again, what you're trying to do here is make sure that when you send it, you're sending a proposal that they want to receive. Why? Because they've told you how they want to receive it. Number 5, the most important one. Make sure you secure a feedback call before you send it. Number 6, could be you're getting ghosted because they've seen price for the first time and they don't like it. It's a bit of a surprise. It's too big, it's too high. It's much bigger than they were expecting. What about the other side? Oh, God, I'm not going with these guys. Way too low. Price cannot be seen for the first time in a proposal. If it does, then it becomes a surprise. Nobody likes surprises, especially salespeople. Point number 7, look, are they just busy? Could it be that it's on their list, it's just not at the top of their list? So let's just be accepting of the fact that because we're all busy people, you haven't heard back yet, but yet's the key word. And the way that you solve that problem is point number 8. You pick the phone up and you call them and you ask them. Folks, our time is up. We have a mantra on the show. I think you know it. Everybody's in sales. We're all selling something. My honest hope and expectation is whatever it is that you're selling, it's going really, really well. You're smashing it out of the park and you don't need my help. And most importantly, thank you so much for being a Sales Cadence podcast listener. If you like this episode and you got something out of it, there must be somebody in your connection, your network that you know is in the sales industry and is struggling to not turn enough of these proposals that they've been asked to send into cash. Think of that person right now, and in 15 seconds time when this podcast finishes, just go and share it with them on WhatsApp. That's all I ask. Thanks ever so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Sales Cadence podcast.